So I was out at the RSA conference this week speaking on a topic called the Internet of Things, and we had some of the big Moo authors there, some guys that you wrote this book with. And the rumor is about you that you are one remarkable CIIO. No one knows what II means, but it's, you know, it's the Innovation Information Guy. And that you're doing some remarkable things. So they said two things. One, give them one of our last signed books of Big Moo, which is How to Be Remarkable. Number one. Number two, seriously, what is your secret? How have you been transforming things? And how come people are calling you a remarkable leader?
It's an interesting question because I don't think it has anything to do with me, right? I mean, it all has to do, and John was talking about laying a foundation, you know? And so it really is, as a leader, it's all about laying the foundation that allows innovation to occur. I'm not a tech guy. I didn't grow up in information technology. I don't know anything, you know, like, an iPhone was like a breakthrough for me in terms of using technology. But what you find is if you could set up the right environment, the right culture, everybody has a great idea in your organization. And your job is to help create a culture where they're comfortable raising their hand, telling you what it is, and then giving them the cover to go execute. And if you give them that, particularly in a big company, you can do a remarkable amount of stuff very quickly. Because they've been living this stuff. They know what to go do. If you think of it as a top-down, this is Sonny's innovation program, you're going to fail. It's just always going to fail. But if you just tap into the people who work for you and say, what do you think we should do? I remember I was walking around and I'm like, hey, why do you do it that way? Or, what do you do? I do this. Why do you do it that way? Well, somebody told me to do it that way 5 years ago. Well, how would you do it? Well, I would do it this way. I'm like, okay, great. Well, you do it that way now. I mean, it's not that hard.
Actually, at Exelon, it was like back in the 1800s.
Right, exactly. Thomas Edison told me how to do it that way, right? So I think that there's so many pockets of innovation. I was with this guy, Carlos Dominguez, who's out at Cisco, and he leads their innovation. And he's got a great line, which is he said, innovation has to live everywhere in the organization. Because if you think you can find it, you think you can target it, you think you can say, well, it's going to be over here or these 5 people, you're not going to find it. It's not going to happen. So I think, to me, I always say, to answer your question, first of all, remarkable is a pretty big word, but I think it's more about just giving people the space to do what they know they need to do.
So you and I did a podcast yesterday with Paul Burtle, who's here from Leo Burnett, and we were kind of teasing each other, and I said something that I'm not sure you agree with, but a lot of these big, fat companies, they come out and they say, I want you to go out there and innovate, and don't worry about failing, and go faster and jump higher. And then the minute something goes wrong, these guys get amnesia of something, and the poor guy out there that was really busted his butt is accused of doing something wrong because he was trying to be innovative. How have you kind of put that protective layer over people to actually let them really feel free and creative to do something?
Well, I don't know if I have, right? I mean, I think I have, but a couple thoughts. One is, you've got to, there's probably 3 things you got to think about. One is, think about where you're going to go innovate, right? Exelon's a big energy company, right? We're $20 billion, whatever it is. I don't want people innovating at a nuclear power plant. I don't want them saying, hey, you know what? I got a better way to run this thing today. That's a bad idea, right? So you got to think about, okay, well, where does it make sense to innovate? 2 is you got to then let the people who have these ideas kind of fail fast, right? There's a term that I've been hearing a lot about, this idea of learning velocity. And that's really what we have today. So get in, try to understand if there's an opportunity, try to do it quickly, try to do it inexpensively. If it works, great, go do it. If it doesn't, stop and move on to the next thing.
Any remarkable examples, just things that...
Yeah, so that comes out of the third piece, which is this whole idea of, then you've got to give them the cover. So one of the guys, we formed this team under me called the Emerging Technologies team. Well, their job is to go out looking at emerging technologies and bring them into Exelon to see if it can help us be better than we are today. So these guys came in one day, the head of it, this guy Brian Hoff, who some folks know and worked with. Isn't that working?
Okay. There we go. Camera, and Brian's going to hear this.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So, yeah, it's going to go to his head. But so Brian came in. Anybody watch Big Bang Theory?
Yeah.
You know the Sheldon box? It's basically an iPad on wheels with a remote control. So Brian comes in. He goes, "Hey, I bought 3 of these." And I'm like, "What the hell are you doing buying 3? Like, what the hell are we going to do with this?" And
so it's an iPad that kind of goes around like this?
Yeah, you basically can sit at your desk, and an iPad goes around, and it's on wheels, and you can control it, and then you can send it to a meeting for you, right? Or you can send it somewhere else for you, and you can see, you can see what they're seeing, but you don't have to be there. So he's telling me like, hey, you know what, for the executive committee meetings, usually just send this. So you can stay at your desk and multitask. I'm like, okay, that's a great way to get fired. But, so I'm like, this is crazy. I can't believe you bought this stuff. And he goes, first of all, you told me I could fail. And so it goes to this point about, you got to give them cover even when you don't think they're doing something smart. You got to say, okay, you know what, I trust you enough to figure this out. But Brian took that out to a nuclear power plant. And he figured out how to use this technology. It's $2,500 is this thing on the, and they send it in now into highly radiated areas. And the people back, so you can have fewer people go into those areas. And so you have, instead of a team of 10, you have a team of 2. And the 8 other people are sitting outside wherever, and they're able to see what they're seeing and interact. Right? So that's an example that was a great learning experience for me because I had handpicked Brian. I had given him the opportunity to say, go blow up the world. And the minute he spent $2,500 that I didn't understand, I'm like, you're a moron, you know? So you've got to keep coming back to
$2,500 can be very personal sometimes.
Yeah, what?
And your credit card or his?
Mine.
Yeah.
But I think that's an important piece.
Here's one of my pet peeves. There's a lot of mobility people here, and since we just bought fuel. So I go into companies, whether I'm on the board or just helping them or as an employee, and their screens look like they're from 1980s. Some of them are ASCII text, some of them are just ugly. There's no user experience. But it's like mainframe, still driven stuff. But everyone comes to work with the best technology in the world, and they get to work in big companies, and they're like, God, this really stinks. This is not something that's useful for me. So we'll talk a little bit about what you're doing to use mobility to better engage employees.
Right. So I think
and a better user experience.
Right. I mean, I think so. Most companies have designed themselves from what I call the inside-out model. Right. You got these big mainframes, data centers. They come over large, wide area networks. They go into local area networks. And at the end of the day, you walk into any organization, they say, here's the computer you get, and that's all you get. Or you get a BlackBerry, but don't bring your iPhone in here, right? And like you're saying, the whole world is flipping. Everything is outside in now. People are coming in and saying, I got my own device, I want to use it. I got my own apps, I want to use it. And so we try to flip that model within Exelon. So we are saying, look, we're trying to start with, and that world starts with the end user. In the old world, you're trying to optimize the flow of information and the assets. You're not trying to optimize the end user experience, right? So you go into any big company, any organization, they spend a gazillion dollars on change management, right? Change management basically just means it's not intuitive, right? If it's intuitive, you don't need a bunch of people coming in and saying, here's how you use it. I mean, we all download apps all day long. Nobody comes to our house and says, hey, I just saw you downloaded Angry Birds. Let me help you try to understand how that works. Because it's intuitive. And so it's a whole different way of thinking, which is you start with the end user in mind, and then you work backwards to figure out how you make it easy for them to interact with their information.
So do you still have big, thick manuals that are bigger than the actual program?
We certainly, well, we're a utility company, yeah, so we have a lot of those. But we're trying to move away from those so that everything is, we did this thing a few years ago, like 2 years ago, where we went out to one of our sites, or one of our plants, a fossil plant, and we just walked around with the guys and said, hey, what information do you need when you're walking around? And they're like, well, I don't need you guys. I've been doing this for 30 years. I don't need it. And I'm like, what if you had an iPad? And they're like, go away, And so they just walked around for a couple of days. They figured out, oh, well, here are things that if I had this and I could just do this transaction when I'm out in the field, it could save me a lot of time rather than write it down and go back. So in 8 weeks, these guys built mobile apps. Right? And they transformed these guys' life. There was no change management, even though those guys are more like me in terms of their Luddites, because they've never really used an iPad and all these things. And they love it. And so from that experience, we're like, okay, mobile apps are the way everybody should be a digital employee. And so we created a center of excellence around mobile app development. And not to give a gratuitous plug, but AKTA is helping us with that because it's not just about developing the app, it's understanding, like we're talking about, the end user, the interface and the experience, and working backwards. And if you don't start there, you're going to have a bad experience.
And in big companies, collaboration, everyone talks about innovation, and like, yeah, well, there's no collaboration, so how are you getting that going? How are you fostering some sense of community inside the company?
You kind of do it kind of top down, bottom up, right? So part of this is the leadership of the company, our CEO and other folks are pushing this idea of innovation, pushing the fact that it's something that you're going to reward. Right? You have to rethink how you reward people and how you incent people because they're doing what they think they should be doing. And if you don't tell them and recognize them for doing something around innovation, they're not going to go do it. They're going to go do whatever you tell them. Hey, this is part of your annual performance review, and you're going to try to maximize on that. The other one is we've just been very opportunistic. So with Brian's team and all the emerging technologies, we just try to find, we're a company of 26,000 people. We just try to find people that want to try to do something different. And what happens there is you find those folks, and we did this mobile app, and all of a sudden everybody's like, oh, that was really cool. I want you guys to work with us, right? And so you build credibility. It's like a product launch. You got your early adopters, and then you've got to cross the chasm at some point, right? It's the same thing that happens in this, where you've got to get your early adopters. Those are the people that are interested in it. You build enough credibility, and then everybody who's more risk averse starts, jumping in.
You know, when I first met you and Brian, you guys had this brainstorm of a thing called the Academy, and kind of an internal project.
Right.
It seems to have taken on life of its own. What is that doing for you guys?
So it's a great example about how you find opportunity. So first of all, what we did is we did a crowdsourcing. So we went out and we asked employees 3 questions. How can we be more efficient? Where have you seen other companies doing things that we should be doing? And what, when you're driving to work in the morning, you just want to blow your head off if you have to deal with it one more day? It wasn't phrased like that, but that was essentially the question, right?
Yeah, they wouldn't get through HR.
Yeah, that was that, or legal. So, and so it was this 3-week project, and it was a crowdsourcing tool, so there was all these ideas being thrown up there. People were iterating on each other's ideas. They voted. The biggest thing that came back was, I have no idea how to build my career. This is a black box to me, and it just seems random. It would be really great if you could assess my competencies, and I could tell you this is where I want to be in 5 years, and you could tell me which jobs would make sense. And so we're like, great, we're going to go do it. So we just pulled a group of people together that had passion around this, and they went and built this thing. And then we actually built it with AKTA. And now any employee in IT, we've got about 1,300 employees, and the contractors that work for us, which is about another 1,300. I always joke, it seems like every employee has a buddy that's a contractor. We have a buddy system. But they can all go in and say, okay, these are the competencies I need given where I'm at, and those are leadership competencies, business acumen, and technical. And in 5 years, I want to be a director in this area. Well, okay, those are the competencies you need, and then it runs the program for you and says, okay, here are the 4 jobs you're going to go need to do to get there. And then you can think about how you get there.
And what if they say, I want Sonny's job? How does that work?
They can have it. I mean, Exelon has a hell of a severance package. That's all I'm saying.
So it's
You can cut that out, guys.
No, they're not. I'm not going to let them.
Right, between that and the fall yesterday, I've got to...
Tape been working. Seriously, but is it like LinkedIn for inside the company?
Yeah, sort of. I mean, so the first element is it's multiple phases. I love this freaking project. So first of all, it's like any employee now can go and say, this is where I'm at, this is where I want to be. Here are the ways that I can get there. Then with the competencies, they assess their competencies, and we're building now the ability to ask 6 other people to assess you. So kind of like a 360. Could be your peers, could be other folks, it's all private. And you can get a sense, okay, am I delusional, or am I underestimating myself or overestimating myself, right? Yeah. Then we came up with something, a reward system. This is one of my favorite parts. So you can go in, and there's the leadership competencies, and you can put down up to 3 people for each leadership. Who's innovative, who's your go-to person, who's good with engaging their employees, and you can give them badges, okay? But what's so cool now is we've taken that data, so there's about 8,000 badges that have been given. We're able to mine that data and look at who are the people in the company that are really the influencers. Who are the people that are moving the needle? And because generally as senior leaders, we have no idea, right? Because everybody's kissing our butt, right? So we have no idea what the truth is. So, you can't say, hey, who's really good? Because nobody's going to tell you the truth. But now you got all this great data that says, you know what? Dean's really, and we're like, Dean, what the hell? I mean, yeah. Dean, really?
I want badges, by the way.
Right, no.
I never get any badges.
So it's a very powerful tool because you can identify, because I'm a big believer in this idea of social capital, right? And if you're going to make a big change, you've got to leverage the social capital that's in the organization. The social capital are the relationships, the trust that exists. And if you can find out that person that says, you know what, I've been working with Dean for 20 years, he always knows what's going on, I trust him, then you can, if you go to Dean and Dean believes in what you're saying, you'll reach 50 people a lot quicker than you could trying to convince 50 people who don't really believe you.
So that's really mimicking the outside world, how we get stuff done in our own networks.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So without your vision and passion, my guess was in a massive $20 billion Brazilian dollar company, it never would have done. Everybody wants to know, is that how you hurt your foot? You
It is,
put
it
down
is,
one day
yeah.
and said, this shall be built?
Yeah, no, it was kicking somebody's ass, and they really did have that buns of steel. It was kind of weird. No, I don't know.
Speaking of buns of steel, let's talk about startups. So you're getting a reputation for working with the...
Getting a lot of reputation.
Emerging great guys, I'm telling you.
Yeah.
RSA, you should have been one. Seriously, working with emerging growth companies. So you and I did a Dancing with Startups event at 1871. That was
Right.
your first one, your kickoff one. You're working with companies like AKTA, emerging growth companies. Just give us some ideas about why the large corporations, or specifically why do you want to do that? What do you see, what's the vision and strategy? You see how that's going to affect Exelon over the next couple of years?
Right. Well, it goes back to that idea of the velocity of learning, right? In a big company, you're not designed to learn quickly, right? You're designed for big economies of scale and process efficiencies, and it's a very risk-averse culture for good reasons. And it doesn't matter if you're nuclear or if you're any other big company. You're just trying to get economies of scale efficient, and a lot of big margin comes with that. And so you can't move quickly. You don't learn quickly. But smaller companies do. They know they got to move quickly because they only eat what they kill, right? We eat regardless of what we do that day. And so you need to be out there and see what are people doing, and then figure out how do you bring that in. And that's why like the Dancing with the Startups is so important. So that's the other piece of this emerging technologies team we created is their job is to go out into the external ecosystem across the country and say, who's doing cool stuff that we should bring into Exelon? Dancing with Startups is a great way to do that because they're curated. We can't go and see everybody, but we can go to a certain region. We're going to Baltimore next month, and we're going to look at companies involved in cybersecurity. Some of the leading companies that are smaller and say, okay, well, do they match what we need? And then because we're a big company, we have a fund, we might actually be able to take an equity position in them too. But that's it. I mean, that's keeping up with the velocity. The velocity is so great right now that if any big company thinks they can keep up with it without tapping into the external ecosystem, they can't. You just can't do it.
There's definitely a need for speed. So partnering with startups to increase your growth and innovation is huge. Actually doing it is scary. It's the most, it's just an odd couple as it is. And your team seems to be gravitating toward it from a perspective of how do we do this and use it to actually move the needle. Something that's very useful, not just, hey, that was fun.
Yeah, no, I mean, everything they do, they have to get to scale. I mean, we've given them a target. We said, okay, you cost us X, there's 15 people on this team, cost X amount, you need to deliver by the end of the first year a 2X return. And by the end of second year, a 5X return. So you've got to be generating value for the company. It can't just be, there's too much cool technology out there that you could just kind of go around wearing Google glasses all day without actually doing anything. So, part of this is,
Once I had a ticket.
yeah, you got to speak, yeah. It's kind of, yeah.
I did, California.
So, I mean, it's got to be practical. And that's why these guys they're looking for those opportunities and spending time, but it's got to be bringing it back in, piloting it with an eye towards scale.
The last thing on people before we throw it open to the group to ask you some really embarrassing questions. I'm being told to make her do something way too polite. I don't know if there is.
Yeah, I know.
So there's a digital crisis going on in terms of recruiting talent. For companies like AKTA, a lot of the companies in the room are emerging growth, even some of the government groups in the room. Not to mention Fortune 10, 20 companies, trying to attract and retain the best millennials. Companies like AKTA have an advantage there. So what are you doing to, IT Academy is perfect.
Yeah.
Taking that company-wide seems like a perfect strategy. That's like engaging them once they're there. How do you attract them?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two pieces, right? One is, like you're saying, there's the recruiting and the retention. But even the retention part, you have to figure out in any market, whether it's your suppliers or whether it's your employees, if you're going to try to get the best, is that something you build or you buy, right? I don't think that the best data scientists or the best developers in mobile apps or the best UI, UX folks want to come work for their local utility.
No, they're all here.
They're not like, yeah, I can't wait to go work for the utility. That's just my parents' dream for me, So it's just.
Actually, it was the railroad. It was my parents.
Yeah, well, yeah. So I think that you have to be realistic about understanding what your need is, and then figuring out how you're going to fill that need. And I think, but you do that with every other part of your business, right? Exelon doesn't make poles. We buy poles, right? We have people that do tree trimming. So you got to look at it.
There's a joke in there somewhere.
I'm sure there is.
Not that quick.
But you know, so you've got to figure out like what's economic for you, and also where you can be competitive. And I think for a lot of these emerging jobs in the mobile space, in the space of big data, we're not going to be competitive, right? And so let's stop pretending like we are. Let's figure out the right partners to go do this with.
Got it. You dare take a question from the
Sure,
audience?
yeah.
All right. Just got a great question. Speak up. Speak up.
Or not so great question.
Dumbfounded. Anybody got a good mobile question? Here's one back here.
They're just like, I want another drink and I'm waiting.
What was your biggest surprise learning over your career?
My biggest surprise learning over my career, just generally my career, that it's not about me, you know, which was really hard because I was the youngest of 4 kids and I had 3 older sisters and came from a patriarchal Indian family. So I thought it was all about me. I thought it was all about me. So I was like, oh my God, what? It's not about me? This is weird.
I told her tonight, this is all about you. That's why you're sitting in the hot camera.
So I was like, that doesn't, you know, that doesn't work for me. That really your success is dependent on other people. There's a great line, there's this guy, Clay Christensen, which I'm sure a lot of you have read, The Innovator's Dilemma. But if you haven't read, he's got this other now book, but he had this article called How Will You Measure Your Life? And he talks a lot about the balance in life and how do you make sure you don't get completely addicted to success and accomplishment and lose sight of every other part of your life. But in there he has this line that he says, management is a noble profession because how people feel when they come to work and how they feel when they go home at night is in a large part determined by how they're treated that day. And so I think that was the biggest aha for me, which is like, that's my job. My job is to everybody who comes in and works in our organization feels valued. And if they feel valued, you will get an enormous amount out of them, and you will be so much better than you can imagine.
Luke, do you have one?
I do, yeah. So talk about innovation in a company that your prices are regulated, your procedures are regulated, so much of what you do is governed by external parties.
Right.
And how do you actually innovate in a company that others might say is locked in a box?
And this is a gentleman from the financial services industry. There's many other people here that are from the financial services industry that are not even allowed to bring iPads to work.
Right.
How the hell can you innovate if you can't look something up on the internet?
Well, I mean,
Seriously.
no, I mean, you know, there's always going to be restrictions, right? And so I would say 2 things. One is part of our industry is pretty deregulated, the generation side. So you have to be competitive. It does matter there. And speed matters, cost matter, all that kind of stuff. The regulated side, which is like your ComEd, which is more your transmission and distribution, typically they wouldn't have to be doing things around innovation. The fact is we're spending billions of dollars around this idea of smart grid, right, and smart meters. So right now, I'll give you an example. Let's say there are 5 million customers. We do 1 meter read a month for those customers. With a smart meter, we're going to do 1 read every 15 minutes. So that's 4 an hour, that's 100 a day, that's 3,000 a month. 3,000 times 5 million. What do we do with that data? Right? That, you have to innovate. You have to think differently based upon this Internet of Things and what's going on. So some of this is, I don't think that the innovation, the question for me is more about what drives the innovation. And is it being driven internally or externally? And I think with some of the stuff with smart grid, it's being driven internally. But now with distributed generation, rooftop solar, fuel cells, storage, people leaving the grid, microgrids, we've got to be innovative because we're going to lose market because in the past, you didn't have a choice. In the past, it was that inside-out model that I was talking about. The beauty to me about this IT world is it's very much like a utility. It's an inside-out model. You send it out. At the end user gets what they want. You don't like your electricity. What are you going to go do, right? And that's changing. So we have to innovate even if we don't know how or even if it wasn't something that came from us internally. Does that answer your question? No? You don't like it? I think it's a good answer. I thought that was a good answer. Other people like that answer?
Financial service is tough.
That was a real answer.
We have time for one more question. Mike.
Do you have an innovation portfolio? And if you do, how do you weight it?
So
The question was, do you have an innovation portfolio? And if you do, how do you weight it?
yeah, I mean, I think it's like any other. It's like any other portfolio, right? I mean, first of all, you've got to have a pipeline. So what we try to do, and that goes back to the idea of that external ecosystem. We've got to be able to see what's out there then you need some type of filters. And if you don't have those filters, you're just going to be overwhelmed with all these different things. And so we are putting in filters. And some of those are things like there's got to be a real opportunity for significant change within the organization. And then we have to have a willing partner within the business to go do it. So once you kind of put those couple of filters on it, you start getting a pretty, you take this huge world of stuff and it starts narrowing pretty quickly. And then you have a portfolio across the different areas of Exelon and the different types of technology. So we're doing right now, we're looking at 3D printing. We're looking at LiDAR technology. We're looking at mobile apps. We're looking at big data. So what you're trying to do is understand from the external ecosystem, what are the big trends, what are the things happening, try to find that company that you want to partner with, and then build a portfolio so you can explore those areas and learn. You may not end up working with the company that you've explored with, but at least you've been able to understand that market in a way that you didn't before. So that's how we're kind of thinking about the portfolio.
It sounds awfully organized. Where's the creativity in there? Because occasionally you want to let them chase that shiny new.
Well, that was that frickin' Sheldon bot. I mean,
you gotta shut that down.
Oh, they went out and they bought Google glasses. This is another great story. So they bought Google glasses, and again, a lot of times you have to have two people when you go out in the field. With Google glasses, we're doing this thing called See What I See, and so you can send one guy out in the field, and the other person can be back and seeing what they're seeing. And that's like $1,500, right? So we have a whole bunch of, what you need to do is, you need to look at a whole bunch of stuff, play with it, but there's a difference between that and piloting it. So we're constantly playing with stuff, but the pilots have to have enough legitimacy that we can see a way that we think it could have impact.
I think you're hitting on something really key here, which is a lot of the innovation we don't talk about is cost side innovation. You guys attack massive cost side innovation. I'm sure the unions don't appreciate it. And a lot of that has to do with mobility, because you're reducing the amount of people that need to be involved, and reducing the risk and all that stuff. So really appreciate you being here. Just as a final plug, just what your people working with AKTA seem to really enjoy the relationship we have. What do you like about working with companies like that?
Well, John has his old saying that there are think tanks and then there are do tanks. And AKTA is kind of a do tank, right? I mean, I don't like sitting around talking about doing something and then talking and talking and talking, right? So this was
That's what we're doing.
Well, that's a good point. But I do like talking and talking and talking if I'm drinking. So that's the only point. Yeah, so thank you. But I mean, I think, it's just been great. I mean, because they bring a creativeness, and again, going back to one of the original questions about the way IT departments have been built over time, we're not focused on the user. So to have a partner that says, look, that's clunky, that's stupid, they're not going to be able to use that. This is how people think, this is how people interact with their devices, has been hugely beneficial, because that's not a skill set we have internally. Our skill set is putting in big enterprise applications and then doing change management on how you go through really nasty screens to get what you need to get done. So it's been a huge benefit, and then to be able to just know that they can go build it. So they built this IT Academy, and it's continuing to grow. And I will tell you, we built it because our employees said, hey, this is something we want. Every other part of Exelon wants to use it now. Finance, legal, all the other businesses are saying, yeah, we have the same problem, which is our employees have no idea how to build a career. And if they ask their supervisor, and this is probably true for people in this room, if you ask the person you work with, you're like, how do I get to the next level? They're like, listen, just keep working hard and we'll figure it out, right? I mean, it'll happen, right? And you're like, I would like a little more certainty. So it's been I think the fact that it's easy to use and we can demo it in 3 minutes has made the adoption within, but also across, hugely advantageous.
Fantastic. I want to thank you for being
Thanks.
part of the AKTA Leadership Series.
Thanks for having me.